Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Veg Grower Podcast. My name's Richard and I want to encourage and inspire you to grow more of your own food. And I do this by sharing what's been going on in my own allotment and my own garden. Now that's what I would be usually sharing with you, but this weekend weather has been a big problem. During the week we had our first frost, which is about 2 weeks early. We even had snow one day, which is very rare here in Littlehampton. But over the weekend, Storm Bert has hit the UK. It's caused quite a bit of damage. I haven't checked the allotment yet, but at home we seem to have got away with the damage. But because of this storm, I decided to stay indoors. Play it safe. It's not worth putting myself at risk and possibly putting emergency services at risk. So I stayed indoors and just saw it through the storm. Friday night, however, I went to Bishopstoke to do a talk. And at the end of the talk, I did a little Q&A with the audience. And I thought I'd share my answers to the Q&A with you. Now, the first question I received from one lady who has got caterpillars on her kale. And she was after some tips on how to tackle that. No, so there probably are white cabbage butterflies, which you quite often see in the summer. Just a white butterfly, basically. Very easy to recognise. And what they do, they lay their eggs on, they particularly like brassicas, so they will lay their eggs and the caterpillars will munch through your brassicas in no time at all. They are a gardener's pest. Now, I hate the word pest. I have to say this. I hate the word pest. They're not a pest. That's nature for you. It's natural. How can we control or stop the cabbage white butterfly from attacking the kale? The first course is to think about potting some netting over. Now, the netting needs to be fully over the plant with no gaps, quite a fine mesh, because if the net's got too big a holes, the butterflies can fly through. It's quite a fine mesh on it, but also not touching the plant at all. Some people literally will take the netting and lay it straight over, and that's easy for the butterflies, to lay their eggs on the plants. So you want to make sure it's not in contact. The other thing I would say you want to do, try and encourage natural predators into the garden. So I like to encourage birds. I don't use pesticides at all. I will not use pesticides, but I encourage birds into my garden. Thrushes, sparrows, anything like that. We even get a falcon that comes into our garden quite often. And they will hunt for these caterpillars, they will hunt for the butterflies, and they will take care of those pests and reduce the numbers down quite well for you. We encourage them by putting up bird baths, bird feeders. We've even got a hedgehog house to encourage hedgehogs as well. That also helps with slugs and snails, which have been a massive problem this year. Another thing that I can recommend, chickens. I've mentioned that I've got chickens. Chickens help with pest control. Got to get chickens. Yeah. Well, what happened? The chickens, and it's so satisfying when I hear this. I let my chickens free range around my gardens. Roxy has to be locked up indoors though, otherwise we'll have no chickens. But they'll free range around the gardens, and if a butterfly flutters by, they will catch it in their mouth and eat it. So that helps with pest control. But I also feed them when I go along and pick off these caterpillars and then feed them to the chickens as well, and they will eat the caterpillars. I don't like to use pesticides because I don't believe in killing. I'm not a vegan or anything, but I don't believe in killing anything unnecessarily. But I'm happy if they become food for our wildlife or our chickens. There's also some nematodes that are on the market. Has anybody heard of nematodes before? So nematodes are a type of parasitic worm. And you buy them in a sachet. They're quite expensive, but you buy them in sachets, you put them into your water, and you water them into your garden, and the nematodes will hunt down all these caterpillars and various other things. I've trialled one this year, which is a mix of different nematodes, specifically for fruit and veg gardens. And I've had some quite interesting results with it. It definitely is something to look at. The downside I find with nematodes, particularly when it comes to slugs and snails nematodes, they're very indiscriminate. so they will kill all the slugs and snails in your soil. And the trouble with that, there's only about 7 types of slugs that actually eat our vegetables, yet there's 30 types of slugs in our soil. So if we're killing all 30, it's a delicate balance on the ecosystem going on. I'm very much about looking after the soil, looking after the wildlife, because I think that provides us with better results. So this question comes from, is it Jose? From Mallorca, and he asks, why do I have problems growing garlic? Now, I've actually managed to talk to Jose about this. So garlic is a Mediterranean plant. It does like a lot of sun, but it does grow very, very well in this country. In fact, on the Isle of Wight, there's a place called the Garlic Farm. You're aware of it? Yeah. Have you ever been there? Fantastic place, isn't it? Really fantastic place. It's not that far from here in reality. So you can grow garlic very well in this country. Now, what I've discovered talking to Jose is that he buys a bulb from the supermarket and plants that. That I would not advise doing. Now, we don't know where that garlic has came from or if it is grown in Britain. Chances are it's probably came from Spain, or it probably grown in something like a polytunnel. What I would recommend, go to a garden centre. They are expensive, I know, but you can buy a couple of bulbs in a pack. They're probably £2.49, £3, something like that. Plant that. You take the cloves apart, plant them about 10 centimetres down if you can. Now, depth is quite an important thing, because again, Jose was saying that he just literally pots it so it's just under the surface. What I found is that if we can get it to a 10 centimetre depth, so a good dibber's worth, we actually get better garlic. It's something to do, it grows a bigger stem, and that encourages it to grow a bigger bulb. But I say that with trepidation. If you've got soil that isn't very poor draining, there's a chance that that bulb, that clove, might rot in the soil. Now, I'm on a clay soil, a very heavy clay soil as that. I've built raised beds. Where some of my beds aren't as deep as the others, I can't quite go to 10 centimetres, so I do have to go a little bit shallower. And I can see the difference between for the size of the bulbs. The deeper ones do grow much bigger. I use a feed. I get this from the Garlic Farm, actually. It's a garlic fertiliser feed. I add that about once a month. It's a granular, so you just sprinkle it on. Doesn't need a huge amount, but it's a good feed, specifically formulated for garlic. I also mulch with leaves at this time of year. So I go down to my local park, get some bags of leaves, which I make leaf mould out of anyway. I run that through our lawnmower to chop them up a little bit, and then I place that over the top. And generally speaking, we end up with some fairly good garlic. Then what I do, I save the biggest couple of bulbs from that lot. So what we've grown this year, the biggest couple of bulbs we've replanted this year. And I keep that going for several years. So it's not costing you any more money. It's actually saving you money because you've only had to buy the garlic once. You're saving your own garlic. And what it also does is genetics. Genetically, the biggest bulb is the one that gets replanted. So it's going to hold on to that sort of gene and tell itself, I want those bigger bulbs, and that carries on for year after year. And then eventually, it'll fine-tune itself to the conditions in your garden. What's the best way to store them? Yeah, you can plant them. So garlic tends to stop growing after the longest day. So I try and get it out around then. Some people will wait until the stalk goes brown. It does depend if it's hard neck or soft neck variety, because there's varieties upon varieties, like we were talking about with the potatoes earlier, hard neck and soft neck. The soft necks will flop over, but really you want to get it just before they flop over. But the best way to store them, what I do, I dig them out of the ground, place them in my greenhouse for a couple of weeks to fully dry out, then I cut the roots off, and then we can plat them to make a nice garlic plat, and then hang that up in the kitchen. Or what I tend to do is I just cut the top off and then place them in a bag and keep that in our larder. And that works quite well. Another thing that I've just done this year, actually, is I've made our own lazy garlic. So it's a lot of work peeling the lots of garlic. But basically, I peeled a good few bulbs of garlic, put it into a liquidizer with some vinegar, chopped it up, and then stored that in a container in the fridge. Whenever we need any garlic, we just get that container out, spoon, and off we go. Well, I'm just going to interrupt this podcast quickly and just remind you, if you're enjoying this live Q&A, then please do leave a rate and review on your podcast provider. It only takes you a few seconds, but it means the world to us and helps us get found by more people who may also be wanting to grow more of their own food. Please, please, please do it. Please do. But not only that, if you are enjoying this podcast, you want to help support the work that we do and keep this podcast running, then please consider becoming a member of our Supporters Club. The Supporters Club is honestly just set up to keep the podcast running. It costs just £5 a month to be a member, but for that you get access to extra behind-the-scenes podcasts that give you a bit more information of what's going on here at the Veg Grower Podcast HQ. Not only that, once a month you also receive through your letterbox our gift pack. And in that pack, you get our monthly mini newspaper, which gives you a few hints and tips of what you can do throughout that month. But you also get a collection of seeds, and these seeds can be sown in that very month. I've carefully curated those to make sure they are suitable for sowing that very month. All that for just £5 a month. I think it is a bargain. Plus, it helps keeps this podcast running, which really does help me out massively. Now, this week in the Supporters Club, we have actually sown a few seeds. We have sown our herb of the month, which is parsley. I like to sow a herb every month, and parsley is just right for these cooler time of year. We've also sown some habanero chilies. Now, some people might think it's very early to sow chilies, but chilies do need a very long growing season, and that's been fantastic to sow in November. So if you are interested in becoming a member, please head to the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk to find out more and sign up. Right, let's get back to this Q&A. I've a Cox's apple step over. It's about 7 years old. This is from Jane. It's never blossomed or borne fruit. It has a pollinator, so I don't understand why. Thank you. So first question, is it flowering?
Nothing.
No flowers? No. Okay. Just a leaf. Do you prune it?
Yes.
Right. So if it's not flowering, that's probably why we're not getting apples, I would guess. Just to explain as well, step over, I was talking about an espalier earlier. A step over is very similar to that, except it's just one branch, quite low down, and you can literally just step over it. That's why it gets its name. Fantastic use of space again. Now, the chances why it's not flowering is it probably needs a bit of potash, a bit of potassium to encourage the flowers. Something like a tomato feed. Now, it probably sounds a bit bizarre saying tomato feed. Tomato feed is not just for tomatoes, it's for any fruiting plants. It's just called tomato feed because, I don't know. But I use tomato feed on anything that flowers or fruits. Another thing, if you've got a wood-burning stove, the ash from that, sprinkle that around. That's a good source of potash. In fact, during World War II, that was used heavily as a source of potash, a source of food. You do need to keep it dry until you use it. That's the only thing to remember. But I think that's pretty much your problem. Try that. The other thing, you made a note about pollinators. And what you find with apple trees, they do often need, there are some self-fertile varieties, but they often need another pollinator. And there's a lot of different variations in what pollinators they need. I always thought apple trees were really easy. Just buy an apple tree, you stick it in the ground and you'll get apples. No. As a pollinator, you need some that are producing the right type of flowers for that tree at the same time. And there's like A, B, C, D pollination groups. So if you are looking, or if you have got trouble with apples, what I first recommend you go and find what variety it is, find out what pollination group it is, and then work out what you need from there. Because I could be here all day going through every single type of apple here. Anybody else got any more questions? Bindweed. How to get rid of bindweed? Yeah. Yes. So this comes back to what I said earlier about my methods of tackling weeds like that. So as a no-dig gardener, I do not dig out roots like that. What I do, I hoe every single day. If a plant hasn't got any leaves, it's not going to photosynthesize, and those roots will die off. Any plant, eventually they will exhaust themselves if you constantly hoe every single day. I know that sounds like a lot of work, but once you're on top of it, it's not. Don't forget to add a mulch as well, because that's going to make it harder. It's just about exhausting those roots and making sure they don't have any energy to continue through. And also, don't forget to grow things in its place. I know it's a bit of a battle with bindweed. I think bindweed's actually quite a beautiful flower though. It's quite an interesting plant again. But it's all about just keeping on top of it if you don't want to dig it out. Another thing to do, chickens. I told you they were going to come up. In all honesty, what I find with chickens, so has anybody seen those cultivators, the 3 claws that you use in the garden? Yeah, that's a chicken's foot. Basically, it is. And the chicken will come along, it will scratch around in the surface of the soil, it'll dig out all those roots, all those weeds. If you're not careful, it'll dig out your cabbages and other things as well, but you can prevent that. And they'll rummage around for slugs, snails and any pests as well. So you're getting several things, plus you get manure from them. I haven't mentioned manure actually. So we don't import any manure from any farms anymore since we've got chickens. And we're able to produce a lot of compost, enough compost for our garden, because we have these only 4 chickens in our garden, because they create manure, they eat our waste as well, and they eat pests, and they give us eggs. I mean, what's not to like about them? But we don't have to bring in any outside resources. Sometimes when you import manure from a farm, it's known to come in with grass seeds, especially couch grass seeds. Well, we've eliminated that by having chickens in our own garden. And they get rid of bindweed quite well.
Chopping all the veggies, sizzle in the air. Chef's got with the magic, smells are everywhere. Water starts to boil, onions hit the pan. Recipe of the week, let the feast begin. Cooking with Chef Scott, flavors come alive. Tune in every week for a tasty bite.
Hi, it's Scott here with this week's recipe, and this week we have Café de Paris butter, a beautiful flavoured butter with anchovies, tarragon, parsley, tomato, Henderson's relish and other savoury flavours, so it really packs a savoury punch. Traditionally, it's served with steak, but I have found it goes with anything and everything. I like it with roast celeriac, roast cabbage or squash. It's also great with seafood. Really, the options are endless. I recently made a squash risotto with king prawns and Café de Paris butter, and it was fantastic. I have also served it with celeriac steaks in the past, but I recommend making it yourself and experimenting with your homegrown goodies. So, let's head to the kitchen and hear how it's made. As usual, you can find this recipe and others on the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk or on my Instagram page, Seed to Table Plot 13. For this recipe, you will need 250 grams of butter, 50 grams of diced shallots, 1 clove of chopped garlic, 3 chopped salted anchovy fillets, 30 grams of chopped capers, 15 grams of chopped parsley, 5 grams of chopped tarragon, 1 teaspoon of paprika, 1 teaspoon of mild curry powder, 2 tablespoons of Henderson's relish, and 1 teaspoon of tomato paste. Method: mix all the ingredients together until well combined. Then place the butter mix onto greaseproof paper and form into a sausage shape, rolling it in the paper to form a Christmas cracker shape. Then chill in the fridge, ready for use. or you can freeze it for a later date. And that's the recipe done. And that's it from me this week.
Well, that recipe from Scott sounds absolutely delicious. Cannot wait to give that a try myself. Now, the next question I received from a young lady in the audience was with regards to a very large pot that she had in her front garden, about the size of a dustbin, and she felt inspired to start trying to use her front garden based off the back of my talk, but she wanted to know what she could grow in this large pot. What could you grow there? Olive tree. A few years ago, I bought an olive tree for about £20 from Tesco's. It was a bit of an indulgence, I'll be honest with you. I've still grown that olive tree to this day. Now, if you go to a garden centre, you see the really big olive trees at about £600. I mean, in about 600 years, mine will probably be that size, so it's a worthwhile investment in my opinion. But olive tree, again, a Mediterranean plant, so they like free draining soil. So when you're going up high, like with your rhubarb, it's going to like that free draining soil and grow quite well. Another thing might be worth growing is fig tree as well, because that does quite like it as well. Now, we've got both of these in our gardens, and we actually get olives and figs from them both. So they're productive and they work quite well. There we go. I think you can get like olive trees quite small for, I think, about £20 from places, but they do grow. The only thing with olives, they do need a bit of feed, and there's a olive-specific feed that you could use. Either that, or once a year, scratch off the top couple of centimetres of, same with anything in a pot, top couple of centimetres of compost, and add fresh compost as well. Okay, so the lady there was asking about the right time to sow broad beans. Now, what variety of broad beans are they? Aquadulce Claudia. Yep. Yeah. So, good thing is Aquadulce Claudia can be sown in the autumn and can be sown in the spring. And I actually always sow mine, I only sow Aquadulce Claudia in the autumn. I don't bother with spring sown broad beans. Now, the advantage is that, one, it looks like the garden and allotment is actually doing something over winter by growing these broad beans. They're quite hardy. If we get an incredibly cold winter, we might have a problem. But we can run out with some fleet. On the south coast, or as far south as we are, should be okay. But you can also plant them in the spring. Now, the main advantage I find with sowing them in the autumn, black fly. So the spring ones, I find, get an infestation of black fly, a type of aphid, and that causes problems. The autumn sown ones, we've usually harvested most of our broad beans before black fly comes along. So we're kind of preventing the nature. Sorry?
Green manure on that.
Green manure, yeah. Also green manure as well, yeah. It's a legume. But yeah, there are only certain varieties of broad beans that you can sow in the autumn. Aquadulce Claudia is one of them. I think Sutton, which is a dwarf variety. And it's the same as peas as well. You can sow peas in the autumn, but they've got to be the right variety. Meteor is a variety I can think of off the top of my head. Okay, any more? So the lady here is asking about leaf mulch. And I said earlier that I picked some leaves from a park and I use them to mulch my garlic, which is what I do with those. But I also collect some of these and put them in a separate bin to make leaf mould. Now, leaf mould is basically, if you've ever gone into the woods, you've looked on the ground and you've seen all this sort of black compost, really dark black, really full of life, you know what I'm talking about? That's leaf mould. That's basically rotted down leaves. It's black gold. It's fantastic stuff. The difficulty is it can take a year or maybe even 2 years to rot down to that state, depending on the type of leaf you've got. But I use some as a mulch because it's a free use. We might as well try and use as much as we can to reduce our costs.
Onto the raised beds as they are.
As they are, as a mulch, yep. And that'll be fine, yep. Yeah, they might get blown off a few times with the strong winds, but also stick some in your compost bin or in an empty bin or in the black sacks as well to make leaf mould, and use that. There we go. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you very much to Richard.
Thank you. Well, there was many more questions asked, but I had to edit quite a few of these questions down to make them suitable to go out on the podcast, and I think it turned out pretty well. If you've got any questions, please do feel free to send them my way. We do like questions here at the Veg Grower Podcast. Also, if you are interested in getting me to do a talk at your local garden club, please do feel free to get in touch as well. Well, we're coming to the end of this week's podcast. I know it's been a very different to normal, but as I said, with this storm, it has been necessary. And I hope that you haven't suffered any damage yourself from this storm. If you have, then please do feel free to reach out and share with me what has happened. Well, I'm going to wrap this podcast up, but if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please rate and review on your podcast provider. It only takes you a few seconds, but it means the world to us. We've actually had a couple of reviews come in over this week. So over on iTunes from Ben Johnson 0011, great weekly dose of gardening. Great show. Richard takes you through each subject in a really engaging way with lots of helpful tips and tricks along the way. Huge back catalogue to enjoy too. Super helpful, as I've just got the keys to my first allotment. Keep it up. Thank you so much, Ben, for that review. And of course, Lynn over on Spotify, she also says, "Hi Richard, I do love your product reviews. So reliable, well thought through with so much information and links too. I completely agree about the agrarian plug trainers. Very high quality. I shopped around and found them at a great price over winter last year. Also, thanks for the advice about using pressure washer to clean the veg pod covers. Brilliant. Thanks, Lynn." You're very welcome, Lynn. Always lovely to hear from you and anybody else as well. And I'm glad that you liked the product reviews last time. I have a set of criteria when it comes to product reviews. And one of the things has to be is that I think they are worth sharing. We hit that with last week's podcast. Now, please do rate and review. But if you also have enjoyed this podcast, you want to help to support the work that we do, then please consider becoming a member of our supporters club. Details on that at the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk. While you are at the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk, please do feel free to drop us a comment on the bottom of a blog post, or even reach out and leave a voicemail through the website. Very easy to do, only takes you a few seconds, but we can get some great audio to play in on the podcast. And of course, you can email me, richard@theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk. Don't forget, you can also find us on social media. Please do give us a like and a follow as well. Well, that pretty much wraps it up for this week. We will be back again next time, where hopefully the weather is going to be more on our side. So until then, please take care.